Thanks, David. I'm going to be reading from a number of anthologies where work has appeared over the years. The first one appeared 35 years ago, and it's from Blue Streak in a Dry Year. I used to belong to a writers group, the Saskatoon Poets Coterie, and it's entitled The Road to Regina. March, that terrible two-sided month, has changed its face again. The sun has poked through the clouds and chased away the snow, leaving behind a moist path that guides us to pile of bones. The prairie begins to shed its white coat, is patched with browns, yellows, whites, like a mongrel dog. Ditches offer a cool drink, but we decline, drive onward to the city. Crowds loudly announce their return to this land as they search for an easy meal along the highway's edge, where telephone wires hang crucified on poles. They push their way in uniform lines towards the horizon. All this governed by a chaotic, Turneresque sky. I wonder what the city will have to offer to our eyes. And I'm going to read two poems from the next anthology, Reflections. It was published by the University of Saskatchewan. And this is the shortest poem I've ever written. Decision. One must admire a man's decision to put the square peg in the round hole. And I'm going to read two Muse poems. This one is entitled An Escaped Muse. Cheryl's muse is missing again. She left him in the basement too long this time. No one to talk to, silent and sad, he left, went looking for a kinder home. He hitchhiked west, got a ride straight to Vancouver with a blonde in a barracuda. And this is another Muse poem. It's entitled, My Muse is My Pimp. We wonder where it comes from, and it's definitely different for everyone. For some, it's like a bolt of lightning coming out of nowhere and burrowing into the brain. For others, there's an idea tree where they pluck the fruit from the heavily laden boughs. For me, it's a demanding little creature who sits on my shoulder and whispers into my ear. Sometimes sweet magical words and ideas, other times dark thoughts gushing like a river just after the melt in spring. It dictates and I have to write. I have to drop what I'm doing and let the words flow out. My hand pushing the pen across the empty page like a ghost pushing it, and it sets the pace. My muse is my pimp and I am its whore. It doesn't wear flashy suits, have lots of jewelry, or a wide-brimmed hat, and instead of putting me on the streets, then saying threateningly, you better have my money by Friday, it declares, you better sit down and write what I'm telling you, now. I have no say. I have to write what it divulges, because I am its bitch. This one is entitled Ghosts. Everybody loves ghost stories. Here's several of them.
I don't.
No?
Does it matter?
Our world is filled with them. Stubbornly, or perhaps stupidly, they hang on, not wanting to give in to the notion of their demise, clinging to this world, this death, that was all that they knew. In this desolate country of ours, you'll find them everywhere, like in the abandoned farmhouses of the prairies, the windows shattered, snow drifting through them and into the lonely rooms. You will find them there anchored to the place that the owners abandoned after they failed at taming the perverse, unyielding earth. Agoraphobic, they stare out the windows, afraid to venture forth from their sanctuary, their moans mingling with the wind that blows through the broken glass. Or on the shores of the Great Lakes, thousands of them from the many shipwrecks. Their spirits floated with the bodies until they washed up on land, So great was their terror of the water that they hide in the reeds and the trees, coming out on special nights to comfort each other. You will also find them in the cities such as Toronto. Occasionally, when the time and the light is right, you will see them. Like the spirit streetwalkers, they are the ghosts of some of the murdered women, still plying their trade along the track. Their clothes, hopelessly out of date, they are still strutting, trying to look sexy, trying to make one more trick. A friend saw one once at the corner of Queen and Broadview. Her hair was done up in a bun, her clothing from the turn of the last century. She held a pail in one hand and a mop in the other. Others knew of her, said she worked as a cleaning lady, made the mistake of loving another man who owned a tavern near Salter Street, and when her husband found out, he killed him in a rage. Now she stands by the corner, ready to go to work, waiting to cross the street, a pained look of confusion on her face. This next one is from an anthology, Scarlet Thistles, by the Canadian Poetry Society. It's about a dream I had a number of years ago. A dream which kind of turned into reality later. The dream. Lines of people wearing World War I gas masks and mustard-colored coats stand along the railway track. Steam hisses, white clouds boil up around tankers marked with orange X's that shine in the sallow light. The train starts to move. The figures turn to look at me, the intruder. Their glass eyes stare me into the waking world. I wonder when it will happen. This was many years before Lac Mégantic. And I'm going to read two poems from the anthology Mind Shadows. The first one is entitled The Mole People. We are the mole people who live in basement suites and rarely go outside when the sun is shining high. Our skin is always pale and our eyes are tinted red. Self-consciously, we may say to non-mole people, it's the sun that hurts our eyes. This explains our dark glasses and why we prefer dank cellars where there's no door-to-door sellers come knocking on our door asking for so much more. But at night time we become alive and venture into the streets, foraging for cigarettes and Slurpees at the 7-Eleven store, then go drinking in the life of the night. Thank you. And the next is a true story. August 1962 and November 1963. I remember that hot August morning as our family drove to our farm. My mother spoke to my father in a somber, hallowed voice. Marilyn Monroe died last night. And my father, saying nothing, his hands clenching the gray half-ton truck's steering wheel as he got it along the dusty gravel road. I knew by her tone someone special had died, like a religious figure or world leader. Years later, I came to know who Marilyn was when I saw her in The Misfits, acting alongside Montgomery Clift and Clark Gable, the other Misfits. The only scene that stuck in my mind, when she took off her cowboy boot to shake out a pebble, she did this purposefully, teasingly, in front of some cowboys so she could show off her bobby-socked foot, giving them a thrill. And then Clark Gable grabbing her arm, pulling her along with him. A year later, another important person died. I don't remember where I was when I first heard of Kennedy's death, but the funeral on our black and white TV buried itself in my head. It was the middle of the afternoon, one gray day in November. An American flag was draped over a coffin carried on a caisson. A solemn gathering of people stood next to it. I remember his small son, only a little younger than me, wearing a jacket and shorts, making a clumsy salute to his late father, his eyes gazing ahead, unknowing. And this is from Latchkey Lyricality, which was put out earlier this year by the Ontario Poets Society. Making marriage work. I think a marriage might survive if you had a big enough house. Maybe. About 20 rooms in all. Whenever I've been in one of those big homes, I think of how nice it might be, all the diminished friction there would be. Your wife could be on one side, reading or working away, and you on the other. Maybe you'd be in your studio, obsessed with finishing a painting or writing. You could have little naps, hurried meals, then get back at it without being disturbed. Time would pass and you'd realize you hadn't seen your wife in several days because she had been on one side of the house and you on the other. There wouldn't have been any snippy arguments, no collisions in the bathroom as she rushed off to work, or any snuggling either. So the next time you saw her, you were really glad to see her. Desire had built up and you had things to talk about again. Things to tell her that had happened on the other side of the house.
Good advice. You have a huge house.
Okay, the next poems I'm going to read tonight are from the upcoming anthology, Poems About Sexuality, which will be put out in 2017. And the first one is entitled, Sexy Jesus, Whore Mary. On my first visit to Quebec, I noticed the remnants of Catholicism. Each town and village had a cathedral-sized church visible from miles away, the silver spires piercing the sky, and a profusion of holy statues, some incongruously situated on the edge of farmers' fields as if they had sprouted from the earth, rampant like mushrooms, completely out of context. I remember one in a cemetery several hours south of Baie-Comeau. Sexy Jesus, seemingly oblivious to having been tortured and nailed to a cross, idealized body with perfectly sculpted abs, gleaming obscenely in high-gloss, flesh-toned oil paint, a ribbon of blood tastefully trickling down his chin. It was as if he was only sleeping, perhaps waiting for a lover to bring him back to life with a kiss, the standard fairy tale fare. Then there was a statue of the Blessed Virgin in a village on the south shore of the St. Lawrence, about 100 years old. Her face, coated with at least 20 layers of paint, the last a gaudy flat tone. No other colors added to articulate shape or highlights, making her look like an old whore who had hurriedly left the house with only a thick layer of foundation on. And her lips, a solid red slash, enhancing the prostitute appearance. I was startled mostly by her eyes, though, painted a brilliant blue, bored-looking, dull, but looking up towards the sky, hopeful. Thank you. This is a poem from my childhood, and it's a true story. The Little Man. Sometimes the mind is unclear when we think of the past. Revision makes up for what happened, for what we wish had come to be. But one memory I have is as clear as a prairie sky in the month of May. I remember the first time I kissed a woman. I was 4 years old. It was late June. I vividly recall the pink blossoms on my mother's rose bushes. Our family had been invited to a neighbor's wedding. The Latour's daughter was getting married. I really can't recall what her first name was. The day was hot, the prairie wind strong and dry as its fingers tugged at my hair. My father had earlier joked about getting to kiss the bride. It was the proper thing to do, he said. My mother only scowled. After the church ceremony ended, everyone went to the presentation at the Latour's house. I looked up at the bride, dressed all in white, her gown touching the ground, her dark hair especially curled. The veil had been pulled back from her smiling face, reminding me of the Blessed Virgin statue in our church. She was the tallest person there, and I was the smallest, and she was the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. Years later, my mother told me she surreptitiously carried a child inside her at the time. She made her way around the living room, introductions to some, obligatory chit-chat to others. Then her mother presented her to me. As she stooped forward, I kissed her squarely, purposefully on the mouth. Her lips tasted sweet, her breath like candy. She jumped back in surprise, uttered an elated titter at my bold little act, then looked admiringly at me, regarding me as more than just another little boy. Immediately, I felt a pleasant, tingling warmth in my chest, like when I had had my first drink of liquor, and I knew intuitively I didn't want to live if I couldn't have that feeling again. And later that evening, when our family was back at home, I felt I wasn't a little boy any longer. Thank you. One more? Okay. Okay, I'm going to read a poem. It's entitled The Last Day of Summer. And I have a little ritual. Every year on the last day of summer, I go for a swim in a lake, usually close to Toronto, Lake Simcoe or some other place. And anyways, the last day of summer. It is important for me to believe it is still summer, and it is, but only the last day of the season, fall being just one day away. The sun is not the searing heat of mid-July, but a gentle, even warmth that caresses my body as I lie on the beach. I notice the occasional slash of orange and yellow amongst the trees, interspersed between solid, leafy walls of green. An occasional dried leaf falls to the ground. One floats on the water, becoming a boat that navigates the roiling waves. A snail's shell, bleached white and delicate, lies on the sand, its occupant having long since vacated its abode. The bugs are few, only several casually investigating my skin, none wishing to perforate me. I wade into the water, hesitant at first, expecting searing needles stinging my flesh, but the water is somewhat warm and feel only a slight tingling in my legs. Then I immerse myself fully and eventually float comfortably on the surface. All the tension from the city slithers off me like a snake shedding its skin. I am finally fully at peace. A smile settles on my face as I am suspended in the amniotic water. Autumn is just one day away, but it is still summer today. Thank you very much.